Welcome. So today is Tuesday. It's our Move into Stillness meeting. And so we'll be, as usual, we'll be exploring being with the experience of the bodily sensations, the movement of the body, the rhythms of the movement. So you want to have a posture that is reasonably comfortable for you. We don't strive necessarily to achieve perfect comfort, but we definitely want it to be sustainable. And so I'll be suggesting that we can explore both seated and lying down, perhaps, if we get to that today. But if you find that you need to just remain in one position throughout, then it's up to you which you choose. You can choose any posture that is reasonably comfortable for you, that you can sustain with adequate comfort throughout. And so for those who are able to sit, let's begin seated. And if possible, it's always nice to be able to actually feel the entire body. So if we're seated in a chair or something that is so cushiony and it just pulls us into it, then what happens is we lose a lot of the sensitivity because we're not actively engaging with that sensitivity. So if it's possible for you, and again here, it's what is sustainable for you to sit in such a way that you're not leaning back against something. And also if you can sit on something that provides you with some reasonable feedback so that there's kind of a firmness to the surface, then that would be ideal. But again, only as long as that's reasonably comfortable for you. So if it becomes strenuous, then that's not going to be good. So we all have to start where we are and we work with that. So we don't want to push to try to achieve some ideal or perfection. I'm giving some guidelines so that you know what might be helpful and what you could consider. So you could sit on a chair, you could sit on a mat, you could sit on a floor, you could sit any which way. And if possible, to sit so that your back is not resting against something, but rather that you're just sitting aligned over your own spine, if possible. But again, it's a guideline and everybody needs to start where they are. So now that hopefully you've assumed a starting posture, then we'll begin to just tune into the experience of being here. So you might find it helpful to close the eyes and just feel what it is to be here now. And that might seem strange because we don't often do that. So you might not even know what on earth that even means. But here we're engaged in a learning process. So the idea is that you take the instruction as a pointer to something that's available to you directly. So it's available to you in your direct experience, and it can't be described mechanically. So what has to happen is you have to accept that instruction as a pointer and then just look to see what is available to you. So trust that there is something available to you through your direct experience, that it's not something foreign, and that you can discover that. And as you begin to open to that discovery, then you're engaging in the learning process. So there's a change that's taking place as you make that switch to engage in the learning process. That means you have to let go of a lot of your preconceived notions, a lot of your habits, and a lot of the things that you fall back on unconsciously to engage in this open, curious exploration. So you just start to notice what's happening. What is your experience? You might notice sensations. You might notice emotion. You might notice thought. You might notice that there seems to be, out of habit, an association between these things, so that a sensation seems to be associated with an emotion, and that seems to be associated with a thought that rationalizes the interpretation of the sensation as good or bad or desirable or undesirable. And you might also start to notice there are mental images associated, so that you have this model, a mental model that helps you to understand where you are in space. And that model actually is incomplete and inaccurate. So there may be aspects of it that are accurate, but much of it is inaccurate, and certainly much of it is incomplete. And the tendency is to utilize momentum in thought, momentum in movement, momentum in a general sense, in order to try and fill in the gaps where there's an incompleteness in that model. And that results in incompetence, discomfort, strain. So here we're slowing down and switching over to this learning process, which is an open, curious process, and just noticing what's here rather than attempting to compensate or fix or any of our usual strategies. We're just noticing. So you might notice that you don't actually know what to do with some of the experience, some of the sensation, some of the emotion. So if that is the case, then just notice that what is possible is that you can just allow it. And in order to support that allowing, we can utilize awareness of the breath. So start to notice the breath now. And just notice what the starting point is of the breath, what's happening right now. So you might notice that you were holding the breath, or that the breath was restricted. You might notice that you were breathing very shallowly or very rapidly, or any number of possibilities. But here we're just noticing what that starting point is rather than trying to fix it. So you might have ideas about what the right way to breathe is, and you might automatically just try and engage those habits. But here, just see that it's possible not to so quickly indulge those corrective habits, and instead just be with what is here and notice it. Just notice what that experience is. So perhaps it feels uncomfortable, strained, tense, hesitant, uncertain, or any number of other possibilities. And whatever it is fine, but just notice it. And then rather than trying to impose some sort of mechanical habit for how to breathe, start to open to the breath. So just here again, we're starting from the premise that there's a natural intelligence here. And this natural intelligence is already operating. It's already existent. So we don't need to manufacture that or create that. It's already here. And we can open to that. So in order to open to that, we just have to be willing to set down the habits that we have that interfere with that. So just understand or open to this possibility that the breath can be full and free and satisfying naturally and spontaneously without you having to predict it or anticipate it or know how in advance. That intelligence already operates and exists within you. You just need to open to it. So start to notice what interferes with that, and then just release that. And again, this is a learning process. So if you don't know how to do that, that's okay. In fact, wherever you are on this spectrum of mastery or novice to master, and we're all somewhere on that spectrum, mostly, I would say, toward the novice end of the spectrum, myself included, then we just start there, and that's where we can learn. So we don't need to be anywhere else. We don't need to be more advanced than we are. We just learn where we are, and we do that by opening to what it is that's here. So there's we could say, a lesson that's being presented, and that lesson is about what is unnecessary, that's habitually done, that can be brought to conscious awareness and then released. So you just start to notice, is there some tension, some apprehension, some fear, some anxiety, some restriction, where you just stop habitually, and you just notice that, and that might be uncomfortable, or it might not be uncomfortable, but it might be uncomfortable. So if it's uncomfortable, don't dismay. It doesn't mean anything bad. It's in this learning process, discomfort is not a problem. Discomfort is our friend. Comfort is our friend. It's all our friend in the learning process, so long as we are open to it, because it has something to offer us. It's offering us something, some direct knowledge of ourselves, our habits, and our possibilities. So you just notice where the restrictions are, where the apprehension is, where the limitation is, where the spasms are, where the sense of strain is, and see that it's possible. Instead of trying to overcome it or push through it or use momentum or force or violence, you can just slow down, be aware of how it is that that is taking place, and just release it. And again, in the learning process, you may not, in fact, you will not know how to do that in advance. It's not something you can already have a plan for. It's something that you have to meet directly now. So you just meet the experience, you open to the experience reveals to you its nature, and through that meeting, there's a union, and in that union, there's a surrender. So the sense of all these things that I've described, apprehension, fear, anticipation, and so forth, these are all manifestations of a sense of separation. So we have to open to the experience, to whatever this is, to receive what the direct knowledge of what this is, which again can't be anticipated in advance. It has to be directly received now. And in that meeting, there's a union, and in that union, there's a surrender, so that there's a dissolving of the limitation. So it's a very vulnerable process. It's a very tender process. So if you have a very impatient tendency, if you want to just push through, then you'll have a difficult time. But you'll learn a great deal about what doesn't work. But when you're ready, then you just soften and surrender and receive. And you see that in that, there's a revelation of exactly how it is that you've been unconsciously doing this. And then there's a surrender, there's a release, there's a dissolving, so that you start to find that the breath becomes freer, it becomes more satisfying, gentler, easier. Now start to notice that the breath is moving the entire body. So we, again, back to our mental model, when we talk about the breath that invokes this mental model. And so there's some imagery and some somatic habitry there, if that's a word, habitry, habits, that are just automatic, almost reflexive. So you have to slow down to notice it, and notice that your focus becomes somewhat narrow, which is okay, because you can learn a great deal there too. But now we also want to open that and expand that and start to notice that actually the breath is not limited just to that part of the body that we have limited it to in our mental model, because that was some old limited learning. But if we open to it as a present reality, then we start to discover that the breath is everywhere in the body. And that's actually true. It doesn't mean that the air is moving everywhere in the body. So it's true that the lungs are the vessels for the intake and outpouring of the breath. But the movement itself, the felt experience, is a reality through the whole body. And that, as I say, is true, because that, you notice that, as I've pointed out in the past, that the movement of the breath is what serves as the, we could say, the pump that helps the flow of the lymphatic fluid through the entire body. So the lymphatic fluid is traveling through the whole body as part of this rhythmic wave of the breath. So as you open to it, you can start to feel that that is actually a living reality. You can start to feel the breath from head to toe, front and back, side to side. And then you start to feel the aliveness of the breath, how the breath actually does carry that aliveness, and that it's not about the air so much as it is about that aliveness. So the breath is not just air. The breath is this movement that you can feel directly. You can perceive it directly, and that it is the carrier of the aliveness through the whole body, through the whole being. So you can actually directly perceive that. And the more that you allow that, the more that this learning is starting to come alive in you, and it's starting to make these changes through your whole nervous system. So you see, it doesn't require great effort or strain on your part. It's actually about the more you surrender and open yourself to the reality that's already here. It's already the case. We just have to open to it. So you can start to feel the breath becomes more free. You can feel the breath moving through the entire body. And you can feel that that breath moving through the whole body is bringing this aliveness through the whole body. Now that may or may not jibe with your mental model, but here we're just releasing that mental model, and we're allowing for this direct revelation, the learning process, to take over. So we're just the students. We're just in this receptive posture. And the more that you allow that breath to travel fully and freely and gently and naturally through the whole body, start to really perceive it, then you start to also notice that that brings into your awareness more of these areas in the body where you can notice the habits of restriction or apprehension or strain. You'll notice it as a kind of discomfort of some kind. And that's just part of the learning process. It's showing you exactly where there's something that you can let go of. So you are becoming aware of it. And normally you just notice the habit. Normally when you become aware of these things, you notice what you do. So this is the habit, it's the conditioning. It's to try and do something. So it's almost reflexive. You don't have to think about it. It's unconscious. It just occurs. There's a discomfort, and there's a kind of armoring or a tension or a strain that almost reflexively occurs in reaction to that. But here, because we're shifting to this learning process, there's a little bit of a gap there that allows us, it's a space that allows us to, instead of react unconsciously, we can respond consciously by receiving that knowledge, receiving the experience, allowing the experience, And then again, here it's the same thing. As we open to that experience, rather than shutting down, armoring ourselves, and believing right off the bat that we know what it is, this must be bad, I have to protect myself, I'm going to fall, I'm going to get hurt, I'm going to somehow, this is going to be bad for me. We can open, receive directly the experience just as it is, not as we think it is, but as it actually is, which is unknown. So it's new, it's fresh. And in that opening and receiving, there's a union. And in that union, there's a dissolving of the old habit, of the old reactivity, of the old generation of separation. And so here we start to, again, discover that there is a natural intelligence and a support that's ever present. It's here in the body. And as we just open to it, we find that more and more we can surrender to it. And so we're making less effort. Now, again, you may not know, in fact, you can't know exactly what it is that all of these words are pointing to, because it's pointing to something that's new, something that's beyond your conditioning. So again, it's a learning process. And that means that it's okay to have the experiences that occur, which maybe you interpret as frustration or discouragement or whatever the case may be. But as those experiences come up, just know that those are welcome here too. It's all welcome in this space of learning, because all of it is part of the same process. It's learning about your habits, your reactivity, and how that reactivity is something that you've been doing, albeit unconsciously. So here it's becoming conscious. So you just open to the experience, whatever it is, and you notice the sensations, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the mental models, and all the rest of it. And you don't have to analyze it. You're just open to it. So it's just coming to you. You're just an open receiver for it, for your own experience. And notice as you're just allowing it, there's a softening, a release, a surrender. And perhaps you find you can breathe more easily, more gently, more satisfyingly. And again, you can feel that aliveness circulating through the whole body. So now, this is, I would say, the most important. What we've just been exploring is the most important part. Anything else that we do is based upon this, and it's of secondary importance. So the reason I mentioned that is that our tendency is often to become lost in the things that are of secondary importance, and we forget about what is of primary importance. So I'll do my best, if I can remember, to remind you throughout of the importance of just keeping it very simple, and that your main task is simply to remain open and receptive to this learning process. And in particular here, the breath and the aliveness and the circulation of the breath and aliveness through the whole body, that you can actually feel that movement. And to the degree that you don't directly perceive that, just to realize that it's because there's some habit of restriction or armoring or tension or limitation. And so what we want to do then is just continue to gently open and receive that experience, so that that too can be dissolved, and there can be more free and full experience of the breath and the aliveness circulating through the body. So every movement that we do, I would say in an ideal sense, every movement that we do, whether in this meeting or in life more generally, should be, should is an interesting word, but should be done in such a way that we can continue to allow for that breath and aliveness to circulate fully and freely, unrestrictedly. So you'll notice that much of the time, your habit when you're moving, and you can just reflect, actually, it's all this knowledge is already in the body. You can access it if you just allow yourself. You can just reflect on some of your experiences just today and notice that some of the movements today were beyond your current capacity to do while allowing the breath and the aliveness to move fully and freely through the body. So what happened was that a particular outcome of a particular movement took precedence over allowing for that aliveness to circulate through the body. And so what we did was we restricted, we held the breath. And so we were using more force and effort and strain and violence than was necessary. And we were reinforcing the habits that over many days and months and years have added up to habits of pain and discomfort at many levels of our experience, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. So the movements that we're going to explore together should be done while continuing to allow for the movement of the breath and the aliveness. And that's a challenge. So here, as we start to do these other movements, I'll just remind you as best I can to be gentle and to notice the tendency to want to achieve a particular idea of an outcome at the expense of allowing for the natural, spontaneous, and full flow of the aliveness through the whole body or the whole self. And just to help explain why it's important is that this aliveness is what actually gives rise to all the movement. So if we are restricting that, then our movements become inefficient. Our learning is incomplete. And so then we have to rely on momentum and force rather than on the flow of the aliveness. So the more that we allow this aliveness to flow, what we will find is that the movements become easier, more fluid, more pleasurable, and we begin to move with greater confidence. And that translates not only to physical movement, but to all movement, to confidence in all areas of life. And that confidence, it's important to understand what confidence truly means, and why you cannot fake confidence is that confidence is based on competence. So true confidence is the natural product of competence. And in order to be competent, you need to have complete living knowledge, and that living knowledge has to be flowing from this aliveness. So to the degree that we cut ourselves off from that, we're faking it. And to the degree that we're faking it, we experience all the things that we don't want. Okay, so today we're going to explore some things with the movement of the head and perhaps the jaw. So first of all, we'll just explore this, what is probably for most of us an unusual movement, which is a flexion of the upper cervical spine. So most of the time we know how to do extension, which is this, but we don't know how to do flexion, which would be the opposite of that. So I'll just start to, well, first of all, just see if you can find out what is the opposite of extension of the upper neck. So if this is extension, then what is the opposite of that? And see if you can just discover that for yourself. Just tune into the actual experience of what extension is, and then see if you can allow yourself to find out what would flexion be if it's the opposite of the extension. And move very gently. So we're not trying to see how far we can move. It's not at all about that. It's about competence. And competence is about completeness. It's about continuity and being able to move while this breath is still occurring. So just try that out for a few moments. Just see, can you discover that? Can you discover what that experience is? And it might be unusual. It might be something that you don't have a great deal of confidence in, but just see. Okay, and now I'll suggest to you a movement that you can do that will help you to experience that flexion of the upper neck, which is that you want to create a double chin. Now, I have too much hair here to demonstrate to you what a double chin would be, but I think you might get the idea what a double chin would be like. So, or it's almost like you could imagine that you're a turtle and you're withdrawing your head. So try that a few times slowly and only within just to the edge of discomfort, not pushing far beyond that. But you should experience some discomfort, but just the edge of discomfort, not pain. So I want to differentiate. Discomfort does not mean pain. Discomfort just means it's outside of your range of competence. So while you're able to breathe, so you're not holding the breath, and you might find it helpful if you coordinate the movement in the breath. So you could move only on the exhalation, for example. And I'll show it from the side just in case it's not clear. So okay. So now rest and just notice how your head is on top of your spine now, and see, do you have any new awareness there? And notice, is there any compulsion to go into a familiar pattern? And can you just not indulge that for a moment and just remain here, even if it's somewhat uncomfortable, just to find out what this experience is. And before you move into something else, just find out what's actually happening. What is this experience really? And what is the nature of the compulsion to move into a different pattern? And just see, maybe that also can be met, and there can be a dissolving of that as well. Make sure that you're able to breathe. Okay, so now, if you happen to have already been lying on your back, then you'll already have had this experience. But if you're sitting, because the floor would have provided it. But if you're sitting like me, then I'll invite you to bring one of your hands behind your head. And if you're lying down, you need not do it, because the floor or whatever the surface you're lying on provides this for you. And with the hand behind your head now, let's several times slowly, gently explore that same movement. And when you're releasing the movement, by the way, just see that you can release it rather than exaggerating and moving into the opposite of that pattern. Just release to a neutral. So as you're doing this, you should notice that the hand behind the head, and you can just do it one or two more times, notice that the hand behind the head helps to encourage the back of the neck to lengthen, rather than what some of us may do is when we're trying to do this, we may actually unwittingly go into extension, which is actually the opposite of what we're wanting to do. So the head there, or the hand behind the head, just helps us to have that awareness so that we're actually flexing the upper spine. So the head will slightly tip forward, the chin is slightly coming toward the throat, and it's all retracting and coming back, but just as much as is just to the edge of discomfort and not pushing beyond that. And then you can relax, rest the hand, the arm. And again, just notice now this new awareness of the head atop the spine. Maybe you start to be more aware of the entire spine. Maybe you start to be aware of the shoulders in a new way. Maybe you start to notice the chest in a new way. So many things that are involved in such a seemingly small movement, but you start to perhaps become aware of how much of the body has been, which is to say all of the body, has been involved in maintaining, for most of us, a pattern of strain, where the neck is constantly held in extension, mild extension, which puts strain throughout the whole body. So the whole body is stiffened up in order to support that. And so you see what happens is the soft tissue of the body is taking on all of this work, trying to recreate the support that's already existent. So support is here in the skeleton, in the spine. We can trust in that, but because we're in a habit of not trusting, the whole of the soft tissue stiffens up and tries to compensate. And so then, of course, emotionally and psychologically, we have this underlying sense of life isn't safe, life is hard, I've got to keep working hard, I've got to keep trying. And all of that actually is an outflow of this habit. Okay, so now let's also explore utilizing this awareness of this deep neck flexion with some other movement of the head. So we can, obviously, if we consider how is it that the neck and head can move, one is they can move in this plane, forward and backward, okay, which is kind of what we've been exploring. I mean, this is extension, but that same extension occurs when we just move the head forward in space. So when we move the head backward, we get this flexion. So forward and backward, side to side, and then turning, rotating. So we have all of these, or, we can also exaggerate the extension and flexion, or just extend and flex just the skull. So there's a lot of possibilities of movements there. So we want to be able to have an integrated awareness of how we can have a more functional and easeful pattern of having our head atop our spine. So gently bring the head and the upper neck into this gentle flexed pattern that we've been exploring, and just let that, don't do it so much that you can't maintain it, just a little bit so that you can maintain it for a little while. And then just pause here and notice where is there unnecessary tension. So you might notice that there's a tendency to tense up in the trapezius muscle, the upper shoulder and neck there. So just see if you can let that relax a little bit. You might even just gently stroke with your hand on both sides, just to help yourself have that awareness so that you can release any unnecessary tension there. Maybe just also stroke gently on the collarbone or collarbones, just to have awareness so that you can release there, so that the shoulders and the chest can start to relax. You might also just gently stroke outward on the chest, just to help release and open the chest a little bit. And remember, we're breathing, so it's a lot. Now, we're just gently, it's a gentle flexion. Maintaining that gentle flexion, turn the eyes to the right and turn the head to the right. And then turn the eyes and head back to center. And then turn the eyes and head to the left. And then back to center. And then just let everything relax. And you might be surprised as you let everything relax that maybe everything doesn't move so much, or not as much as you might have thought. So it turns out that that gentle flexion is actually just starting to bring everything back into alignment, just starting to help awaken the awareness of the bones, so that you can just start to trust in the skeleton for the support rather than straining in the soft tissue. So again, as we did before, just notice if there's a compulsion to move into some particular pattern with any part of the body, and just notice what that is. So that compulsion, you might find, if you just open your awareness to the whole of the body, you might find that maybe there's some unnecessary tension in the abdomen, for example. And you can always just use your hand and just touch. So you might just touch, just slide your hand down the midline of the front of the body and just see where do you encounter unnecessary tension, just gently stroking. And maybe you find, I can just soften there. And what a relief that is. Just letting the belly go so that it's not pulled in. And how that helps everything. The chest then can open, come into a neutral position instead of being pulled forward. The shoulders can release. And then maybe you find that the head just naturally rests in alignment a little bit easier. So now let's do the same thing that we just did. And remember, at any point, if you're unclear about the movement, if you're not sure if you're flexing the upper spine, just bring the hand behind the head, just as a reminder, so that the head's not tipping back, but the head itself is just sort of moving slightly backward rather than tipping. So if that's helpful, you just use the hand, and we're going to just bring the head back. So there's this mild, gentle, sustainable flexion of the upper spine. And then use the eyes to turn right, and then turn the head to the right, only within your range of comfort, and slowly, and while you're breathing. And just pause here for a moment. And then you might try this. Bring your hand right in front of your face so that it's almost uncomfortably close to your face. And then bring your head back so that you're flexing again, but while rotated. So you're flexing even a little bit more while rotated, so that you can bring your hand into focus more easily. And then you can release the hand, and then turn the eyes and head back to center. And then turn the eyes and head to the left. And then same thing here, bring your hand so that it's almost uncomfortably close to your face. And then while rotated, you flex. And so that you can bring your hand into focus. And then release and turn the eyes and head back to center. If you want to do that one more time on each side, we'll make time for that. If you don't, you just rest. And then once you come back to center again, just pause and notice what this experience is. Notice how the head is atop the spine. Notice the relationship of the head and the chest and the shoulders. Notice now also the jaw. So the jaw is an interesting part because it's connected both to the skull and to the torso. So the jaw tends to want to move with the skull, but also it has attachments to the torso. So when we're moving the head, we have to, well, let's put it this way, if we don't have adequate awareness and integration of the jaw, then what happens is it starts to create tension in the jaw and in the neck and in the chest and in the back of the head. So then this awareness of this ability for flexion of the upper spine and the ability to let the skull be atop the spine restfully is compromised by this tension in the jaw and which then also is pulling down into the collarbone, into the cervical spine, and then that's going to tend to radiate and produce compensations in the other parts of the soft tissue. So we start to find ourselves being pulled back into those unconscious habits of too much tension. And of course, you'll probably notice, if you really start to be aware, you'll notice that you're using your jaw for all kinds of things that aren't really, where the jaw isn't really needed, but like to manage feelings, for example. So we don't have a lot of time left, so we won't go into a lot of jaw exploration, but we'll just briefly bring the hands to the jaw, and so one on either side, and just you can put the fingertips on the cheeks, and then put the thumbs just under the jawline. So you're just kind of gently cradling the jaw, and just let the mouth open and close a few times with the hands placed here. And now that you have this new awareness of the back of the neck and tendency toward extension of the neck, just be aware as you're opening and closing the mouth, are you tending to extend the back of the neck? And just let the back of the neck remain long. Now, one thing is that many times when we're opening the jaw, we tend to retract the jaw at the same time. So we open like that. And when we do that, we almost force our neck into a mild extension, but the jaw can release down and forward. So as you're releasing the jaw, let it also move forward in space. And you can let your thumbs gently hook behind the jaw bone to kind of help encourage that. And when you close the jaw, let the jaw also remain slightly forward. So the thumbs are just kind of keeping it gently in traction so that it wants to, just if you release, it will just stay gently forward, like you have a kind of significant underbite. I was playing with this recently, and I realized this is one of those primal movements, actually, if you consider what babies, some of the early movements that babies make. This is one of them. So it's a ma, it would be the formation of a ma if you were to give sound to it. So labial, because the lips are coming together and apart. Now we can just gently combine those two movements. So now going to flex the upper spine, flex the top of the neck like we were doing initially as you open the mouth. And then relax the hands. And we'll just conclude, just close the eyes and notice everything that you're aware of. See if you're still able to breathe, and let the breath, the movement of the breath and the aliveness that's carried by the breath flow through the entire body. So even if you've lost a sense of that throughout the last 30 minutes or so, it's okay. You just come back to that now. And notice that it should be a little easier now to become aware of, because we're not creating it, we're just opening to the already existent reality. So it's just about letting go of what's unnecessary, and we find that it's already right here. And then notice in this flow of aliveness that there's also this awareness now of the head atop the spine and the connection between the head and the chest and the shoulders. And the jaw, and just notice if there's any tendency to retract the jaw, to clench the jaw, and just see that you can not indulge that and just allow for this softness and release to be there. Allow the aliveness and the breath to travel even there into the jaw, the cheeks, the throat, the back of the head. So today we, as usual, it's possible it will seem like we didn't do much. On the other hand, it's possible that it will have seemed like it was a great deal. But however you perceive it presently, just know that we've done a lot. There's a lot of reorganization of the nervous system. A lot of learning has been taking place. It's a long time, actually, to sustain that kind of learning, openness. And so there's a tremendous amount of reorganization. The movements that we've explored are very significant. Anything that has to do with bringing more awareness to the head atop the spine and the organization of that is going to produce a tremendous amount of reorganization throughout the entire body and the entire nervous system. So be very gentle with yourself and just continue to trust in the process that's unfolding, this newness that is revealing itself, and the release of everything that's unnecessary, and trust that that's continuing, because it is. This reorganization of the nervous system is continuing for a long time. And so anything that you encounter in your experience for the next several days, just assume that it's part of this learning and reorganization process, and just receive it in that attitude, that whether you interpret it initially as good or bad, just accept it as part of this reorganization and learning process. So you might encounter certain sensations, memories, emotions, all kinds of things are possible, especially because all of this is so connected with everything. Again, the jaw is often how we try to manage our feelings. A lot of this tendency toward extension, hyperextension of the uh, of the upper spine and head can produce tendencies toward pain and discomfort throughout the whole head. So it could be like jaw pain, headaches, sinus pain, all kinds of things that if you experience those habitually, then you may notice them more over the next day or two. If you don't normally notice that kind of thing, you might notice that kind of thing. Or of course you might not. But if you do notice any of those things, just trust that it's part of this process. As it comes to conscious awareness, it's being dissolved. You just keep receiving it, being open to it, and know that it's part of the healing process. So you don't have to worry about it. Just be very gentle with yourself. Notice any tendencies toward pushing, straining, violence in thought, violence in action, violence in any way. And you'll start to notice these ways in which you've treated yourself unkindly. And if you allow it, then those will also be dissolved. So it's a tremendous opportunity. It's a really tremendous learning experience, and it's very therapeutic and healing. So just continue to be open to it and understand that everything that is happening is part of that process. Many things can happen, and if I don't point this out, then the tendency may be to freak out. And it's important that you don't. Just know that it's a very wonderful thing that's happening. And sometimes in that process of wonderful things happening, we encounter some things that have been difficult for us to really receive and be aware of and integrate. But as we do so, then magnificent changes take place. So it's a really, really wonderful opportunity. Just receive it as such. And of course, if you have any doubts or challenges that you're unsure of, you're welcome to contact me and we can clear that up. So thank you as always for joining me. Blessings to you all, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.